I walked out of his office feeling about that big. I was the dumbest person that had ever walked that campus. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, wife without kids. I believe that having kids is a choice and not a social obligation. This channel is all about supporting people like you who've made the choice to not have any children. Okay, it's the end of the day, it's late at night, and I'm probably looking like a mess, but we're just gonna go ahead and do this thing. So I'm gonna do a video that is a lot different than what I normally do. Normally I do child-free content, and you can find a bunch of those videos linked down below if that's what you're here to see. Today I wanted to encourage you guys a little bit because I want to share a time in my life where I was really discouraged and just didn't think that things were gonna get better. Here's my story. For as long as I can remember, I have always wanted to go to graduate school and get a graduate school degree. And I don't really know what prompted me to want that, but I remember being in probably middle school and I was like, oh man, I just really want to go to university someday, and then I want to go to graduate school someday. And so even though I wasn't really sure what area of study I was interested in, that was always my goal. I graduated high school, I went and did my 4-year degree. I studied pre-med. Eventually I decided I wanted to go to graduate school and get my doctorate degree in physical therapy. When I went to graduate school, the doctorate degree was a pretty new thing. Some people, they're kind of confused by it, but it's basically you do a undergrad program and then you transfer straight into a doctorate program. They will go to physio school and get their doctorate degree in physical therapy. I ended up getting accepted into a doctorate program for physical therapy in the US. Now I'm Canadian, and so that meant I had to move. It was really far from where I lived in Canada and flights were expensive. I did not get to see my family a lot, which was difficult. One thing that was also very difficult is that nobody in my family had been to graduate school at that time. So nobody prepared me for how incredibly challenging it was going to be. I didn't feel like I really had a mentor that prepared me to tell me, you know what, it's going to be brutal and you're going to get so much more work than you have time to do, and you're just going to feel completely overwhelmed, and that's normal and that's okay, and that's how most people feel. I felt like I was adequately prepared. I had had to work really, really hard to get good enough grades. I had gotten into this program and I was like, you know what, all I need to do is work hard and do my best and it's going to be okay. Now, graduate school is significantly more challenging. It's a whole other level. I was really, really excited and I was super pumped to start the program. The first semester started, and specifically in the program that I was in, we did 7 to 10 classes per semester. Now undergraduate had been like 4 to 5 classes a semester. A lot of the classes that I took in the first year had labs, and as all of us know, labs are a lot more work than just a regular class. In addition to that, during my own time, I had to work on my thesis. I was pretty overwhelmed after like the first week, and I was like, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? I don't know if I can do this. Well, my first nemesis class was gross anatomy. And gross anatomy is basically the study of the body or human anatomy at the macroscopic level. While it was similar to my undergrad gross anatomy class, it was far more detailed and far more challenging. We had to memorize literally every single piece of anatomy in the entire human body. So the body has 206 bones, and you know, just memorizing the bones is one thing, but we didn't just have to memorize the bones. We had to memorize every like little fissure, every line, every nook and cranny of every single bone in the entire body. Our first week in anatomy class, we got a box of bones. Like, it was literally a suitcase of bones. The human body also has over 600 muscles, and of course we had to memorize every single muscle. We had to memorize the origin, the insertion, the innervation, and the action of every muscle, and then we had to go into each body system and memorize that. So it was an extremely, extremely comprehensive and very detailed class. It was tons of memorization. I've never been that good at memorization. That's always been something that I've kind of struggled with. That's part of the reason I bought this little guy, whose name is Herman, and that also helped me, along with the box of bones that I had, to work through learning how to memorize and being able to visualize where muscles attached, where they inserted, and how they move the body. In the lab, we had
cadavers.
And if you don't know what that is when people donate their bodies to science, and then we were put into groups and our job was to
Dissect.
We would take apart the structures so that we could study them internally. Now, there was a very specific way that we had to do this. We weren't just like going crazy with it. We had to follow this very specific procedure in how we did that. So everything is basically left intact, but you're opening everything up so that you can see the layers of muscle and the layers of tissue and the bones and eventually the organs and all that jazz. There was a fairly large anatomy class there, so every group had a different specimen. In addition to learning what your specimen looks like, you also have to spend time looking around at other people's, because bodies can look different. Every human body basically has the same parts, other than a couple of areas obviously, but you get very familiar with your own body that you're studying. If you're working on a lady that's 90 pounds and 5 feet, some of her body is going to look very different than if you're working on a guy that's 6'5" and he's 300 pounds. I don't remember how quickly we had our first lab exam, but I want to say it was maybe like 3 to 4 weeks into the semester. We had heard horrors of the lab exam and that it was going to be insanely challenging. The professor that taught the anatomy class had been at this school for many years, and he was a really tough teacher. And one of the things that he prided himself on, and he mentioned this many times in the class, he said, I have been at this school for X amount of years, and in all the years I've been here, not a single student has ever gotten 100% on one of his lab exams. So that kind of puts the fear in you, because he kind of held that above the class. And so besides saying that, he also says, depending on how you do on this very first lab exam is basically a predictor of how well you will do in this graduate program. Like if you do crappy on it, it means you probably won't make it through the program. So I studied incredibly hard. I spent hours and hours and hours with our specimens. I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to do really, really well in this lab exam. The day of the lab exam comes and I am like petrified of going to take this exam just because of all the hype, and I had no idea how hard this exam was going to be. And I remember waiting outside of the lab exam for the lab door to open so that we could go in and start the exam, and I was like dripping in sweat. I was so nervous. And so the door opens to the lab exam and we all file in and we're wearing our white little lab coats and we walk into this room and it's like freezing cold in there. I believe there was about 60 stations. So we literally got a piece of paper that was numbered 1 to 60, and we were each given a random number and we had to find the station with that number, and that was where we started. We had 1 minute to identify whatever structure was tagged, and after that he would sound an alarm and then we would move on to the next station. So if we started at number 45, we'd have 1 minute at number 45 to identify whatever structure was tagged, and then we'd move on to 46, 47, like that until you were all the way through every single station. A lot of the things that we had to identify were actually specifically tagged on the specimens. It could be really tricky. Let's say you had to identify the saphenous vein. It's not going to be the entire saphenous vein that you see. It's going to be a tiny part of it. And there were also some charts on walls that had structures that would say, okay, well, what is this? And I remember there was, I think, like some x-rays that we'd have to identify. Sometimes they had like little models, like an eyeball, and then he would tag something in the eyeball and we had to identify what it was. The exam starts. I'm ready with my pencil. I've got my eraser, and I get to my first station and I knew what the structure was, and so I identified it. And then we went to the second station and I identified that, and I was like, okay, whew, I got 2 right. And then I got to the third station and I looked and I had literally absolutely no idea what it was. My mind suddenly went blank. I couldn't even think of a single thing to guess, but I'm like, it's okay, it's only one thing. Like when you get to the next station, you'll know that one. And I got to the next station. Suddenly everything I'd studied completely left me. As the exam progressed, I just felt like I didn't know anything, and I was so frustrated with myself. Then when you realize you haven't answered the last 10 questions, you know that you're kind of in trouble. That was the longest hour of my entire life. And I went through the whole exam, and I knew that when I walked out of that exam room, I failed. I felt horrible. And then we get our results back when we get back to class a couple of days later. When he handed the test back to me and he looked at me, I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I was so embarrassed because it literally looked like I didn't even study, and I did. I studied really, really hard and I did really, really poorly. To be honest, I don't remember exactly what I got, but I literally think I got like 35 or 36%, and I've never done that poorly on a test in my entire life. I was like so mortified, and then he said, you know, some of you did very, very poorly on this test. If you fail the test, you need to come and make an appointment and see me in my office. I want to talk to you. There were about 5 or 6 of us that had failed the test. So the only thing I was thankful for was that I was not the only person that had done really poorly. In graduate school, the grading scale was a little bit different. We had to keep up a fairly high GPA. You know, if you're pulling like a C average, you could get put on academic probation and get asked to leave the program. I made my appointment and I went to his office, and I literally remember this like it was yesterday. I walked into his office. He was sitting behind this like massive desk. There's like books piled everywhere on his desk, and there was like books all around his office. He had all these bookshelves and tons of books, and he was very well read. He was a smart guy. And I sat down and he said to me, well, Hannah, he looked at me and he looked down in his like, you know, book to see what I had gotten. And he said, you got the worst grade in the class, by far. And I was just like, yeah, I was like really nervous to take the exam. I've never taken an anatomy or a lab class exam like that before. And I said, I just sort of felt like I forgot everything. He just looked at me and we just kind of sat in silence for a couple minutes. Well, it felt like a couple minutes. It was probably just a few seconds, and I didn't really know what else to say. And he said to me, I think it's a complete fluke that you got into this program. He said, you're not smart enough to complete this program. And I was like, pardon? He's like, yeah. I said, you're not smart enough to complete this program. He's like, I think you need to quit the program and go into something easy like a nursing degree. First off, a little aside here, nursing is not an easy program. I have several friends that have done nursing. And second of all, I had already graduated with a bachelor's degree. I wasn't going to go and do another bachelor's degree because that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a nurse. I just didn't know what to say. I was completely shocked that he was saying this to me. I said I worked really hard in my undergraduate degree. I had to repeat a class because I didn't do very well in it. And I said, you know, I'm willing to work really hard. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I said, I'm not afraid of hard work. I'm not afraid of studying. He said, well, it's not really about hard work. He's like, some people just don't have what it takes. And you're one of the people that doesn't have what it takes to make it. I just don't think you're smart enough to do this. He's like, I've been here for a long, long time. He said, I can pretty much pick out the students that are gonna be successful in the program, and I also have a lot of influence in this program. I don't think you belong here. You won't make it through the program. I can make sure that you get dropped. Meaning they'll ask you to leave the program. He's like, you can go down to the registrar's office and, you know, there'll be a penalty, but you'll get most of your money refunded for the semester, and so you can take your money, your tuition money, and go to a different program, he said, or you can go home. We have our next class in a couple of days, and so, you know, you need to let me know what you decide to do. And that was basically the end of our conversation. I walked out of his office feeling about that big. Actually, no, I felt that big. I felt like I was the dumbest person that had ever walked that campus. I was mortified because I'd never done so poorly on a test before. I was discouraged. I didn't know what to do. I had had classes that I'd had challenges in before, but whenever I went to go talk to the professor, or the teacher, or the TA, they were always pretty understanding, and they'd say, okay, we'll try this. And he wasn't like that at all. And I guess that's kind of part of graduate school, right? They're not gonna baby you, and I wasn't expecting him to baby me. But I also didn't really expect him to kick me when I was down. I'm not a crier, but that night I called my mom and I cried. I had a pretty sleepless night, and I thought a lot about what I wanted to do and what the right thing was to do, and I didn't want to waste tuition money, you know, staying in a program where, you know, what if they decide they're gonna kick me out in a month and I don't get the majority of my tuition money back? Then I will have wished, okay, I wish I would have left a few weeks ago and I could have gotten it back. But that was one of the lowest points of my life because I just felt like, you know, the people that were kind of in control of my future didn't believe in me. And that's really discouraging. Obviously, my family back home was super encouraging and did what they could for me. And I could try my very, very best, but you know what? If I only pulled C's, I wasn't gonna be able to stay in the program. 2 days later, it was time to go back to my anatomy class, and I was totally dreading it, but I packed up all my books, I put them in my book bag, I walked to class, I sat down in my desk and I pressed record on my little recorder because I would record all the little lectures so that I could listen to them and take extra notes. And at the end of class, you know, as I was walking past him, he kind of said to me, oh, hey, Hannah, he's like, you know, did you think about what we talked about and want to pull out of the program? And I looked at him and I said, no, I said, I'm going to stay. I worked hard to get here. I'm not going anywhere. He said to me, you're really stubborn. And I said, yep. And I turned and I walked out of the classroom. And in that moment, I felt just like a tiny bit of victory. Now, I had still failed the exam. My grade wasn't better, but I just felt like this little spark of like, no, you're gonna keep going. I mean, if you eventually get asked to leave and you have no control over that, that's fine, but you're not gonna walk away from something that you've worked this hard to get to. I guess my message or my takeaway from this is don't give up. Sometimes the outcome isn't what you think it's going to be. Keep going. Even if you don't get that thing that you really, really want. Maybe it's not meant to be, but that doesn't mean that you're a less valuable person. That doesn't mean that you're not smart enough or good enough or that you haven't worked hard enough. It doesn't mean any of those things. Don't let someone's unkind and demeaning words determine your value. No matter what you're going through, I hope that you find this encouraging. Do not give up. Stick it out, because you never know what good thing is going to be just around the corner. And know that there is always going to be someone that has your back. There's always going to be someone that believes in you and that sees your value, not for what you get on a test score or not for what degree you get, but you are valuable because you are you. There is nobody exactly like you. 3 years later, I did graduate. I was so excited. It was one of the best days of my entire life, and I was so thrilled that I did not give up because someone didn't believe in me.